listening to the Factivist Sports Podcast, putting data back into sports conversation. Now for your hosts, Wyatt Simonic and Jake Kindle.
Hello and welcome to Factivist Sports. I'm your co-host Wyatt Simonic, and I'm joined here with Jake Kindle. And this is our very first episode, something that we're very excited about. And being our very first podcast on this channel, we felt that it might be helpful and useful to give you guys kind of a background on who we are and why we came up with Factivist Sports. So I grew up originally in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I know a lot of you are thinking Albuquerque is not really a big sports city, and you're absolutely correct, but through some family ties, I grew up being a San Francisco Giants and 49ers fan. And Jake, he's originally from here, from Utah, born and raised, and so he brings a unique perspective, not only to professional sports like the Utah Jazz, but also when it comes to BYU athletics and the University of Utah. And so Jake and I, we've known each other for a little over 3 years now. We've been working together, and over the course of about the first year, we started talking, and we realized that we both were really big sports fans. And we're very religious when it comes to following sports, whether it be baseball, football, basketball. And we're always having conversations with each other, but also with our family members and with people online in a few friendly debates, of course. But one thing that we really noticed in kind of having conversations together is a lot of these discussions that we were seeing didn't really have a lot of data involved with them. There's a lot of subjectivity and a lot of opinions that weren't very rooted within data. And Jake and I, we very much like data. Not only do we use it for our daily jobs, but we like looking at trends, looking at what's going on, and data we feel like can really take the subjectivity out of an opinion and kind of root it in what's truth and what's really kind of just like an eyeball test. And so we came together and we said, what the heck, let's start a podcast. Factivist Sports is what we'll name it, and our goal behind this is to bring you guys really good content that has a lot of data that can be consumed both on our website that we'll be launching soon, but also we want to have friendly, good conversations here on the podcast. Majority of the time it'll be just Jake and I, but we're hoping to get a couple guests on the show that can bring a unique perspective into our discussions and our dialogue. But Jake, go ahead if you want to add anything to that, a little bit more about your background. But if not, Jake and I, we'd like to really, college football season is upon us, and so we're really excited to bring to the world something that we've been working on over the course of the past couple months, aggregating a bunch of data, and it's something that we like to call the College Football Relevancy Index.
What's up, guys? Hey, thanks for that intro, Wyatt. I'll just add, as a fan, full disclosure, my number one rooting interest is the San Francisco 49ers. And so that's a rooting interest locally. I'm going to follow the local sports, but I feel like Jazz, Ute, and Cougar fans all have a equal dislike for me and my opinions online. And, what I try to do is give honest opinions. Someone challenged me online one time and asked me to be real. And to me, being real just means I'm giving you what I see, what I dissect, and I'm trying to use data to give me those opinions. Yeah. And, we'll jump into that here today with college football. But as we go through this podcast, we're going to talk about a lot of subjects that deal with national sports, NFL, NBA, college football, but also the local programs here, BYU, Utah, and the Jazz. And there's going to be a lot of what we talk about. And those are the things we like the most, and why it's more of an MLB guy than I am, but we'll touch some of those topics as well. Don't bring up Barry Bonds, but we won't talk about that today.
Yeah, that's a whole nother episode.
Some of the things we're passionate about, we argue and debate everything from, T.O. being a first ballot Hall of Fame, should be kind of guy, Colin Kaepernick, how he is a talented enough player to be on any team in the NFL as the number 2 quarterback, some starters. We talk about all that kind of stuff. Today we're going to dive into college football and the relevancy. And so we've created what we call the College Football Relevancy Index. And to kind of set the table for that, back in 2010, the University of Utah received an invitation to go to the Pac-12 conference. And that sparked a local conversation where the term relevant got thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was, hey, BYU's irrelevant because they're in the lowly Mountain West Conference and then they're going independent. And that Utah maybe was relevant because of their affiliation of their conference, because of, like we said before, the logo that was on their field or on their uniform.
Having that Pac-12.
Yeah.
That Pac-12 logo on your jersey.
Yeah, if you have that, then you have to be relevant, right? No, no. We no. Is Kansas football, does that mean anything to anybody? Rutgers, Indiana? No, that doesn't, right? So being relevant, and we have this conversation. Now, some people think being relevant means, being just a brand. Someone like Nebraska, 90s, they dominated.
Yeah,
Tom Osborne.
Multiple championships.
Yeah, those guys, they dominated for a period of time. But what are they now? What are they today? Now, maybe with the new coach coming in, maybe they're going to be good again, but recently they haven't been great. They haven't been competitive on a national scale. So to us, relevancy is rooted in winning. It's rooted in accomplishments and winning at the highest level, competing for conference championships, New Year's Six BCS bowl berths, college football playoffs, and winning.
Yeah, and to touch on that, the methodology that we came up with this is we looked at, obviously in today's world, it's what are you doing for me now? And so that's how we kind of looked at this. And so Jake and I, we decided to use a model of a rolling 10-year model. So with this, it'd be going back to 2008 would be the first year, up and through last year's football season. Now, if you are an NCAA team and you finish in the AP Top 25 at least one time within the past 10 years, you made it into this index. So ultimately, when we aggregated all the data, we saw that there were 72 total teams that have at least ranked in the AP Top 25 one time within the past 10 years. And so on top of that, you have AP Top 25 rankings, Top 20, 15, 10, 5, division titles, conference titles, as Jake was saying, BCS and NY6 bowls, bowl wins, college football playoff championship game, national championships, and Heisman winner. And we've gotten a little bit of pushback on the Heisman side of things, but ultimately that award goes to a player that's obviously playing very well, and more often than not, it's going to a program that's very relevant.
Yeah, a household name, someone that kind of transcends sports. The most recent example of a guy that wasn't from a huge, maybe what people would consider in their mind a tier 1 brand would be maybe Texas A&M Johnny Manziel, right?
Johnny football.
Yeah, so winning the Heisman is a huge deal. How much attention did RG3 bring to Baylor football?
Yeah.
Now, maybe not as much as the scandals after his departure, but
still, yeah. The Heisman, I mean, you just watch the whole ceremony now is, you could argue it's bloated, but there's a ton of recognition that goes to the program that is obviously that the player plays for. And so it most definitely is a component to relevancy. And so we've created this index. We'll be posting it live onto our website, factivistsports.com here as we're getting that website up and running and full of content for you guys. But let's go ahead and jump into this so we can start discussing kind of what we're looking at. But so Jake and I, we went through, this is a point system. Basically, however, the accolades and the accomplishments of your program, as well as winning and being ranked in the AP Top 25, you're going to receive points. And so based on those points, we've separated these 72 teams into different tiers. Now, we'll get into Alabama here in a second after I'm done explaining, but Alabama is basically on their own, and we'll talk about why. But we basically put them in their own tier, and we called it the gold standard. Below them, there's going to be about 5 different teams that are going to be tier 1 teams, then tier 2, and all the way through tier 6. And the teams that didn't make the AP Top 25 in the past 10 years, they're going to be a tier 7. So Jake, go ahead. Tell us why Alabama is in a tier of their own. Why did we decide to put them above a tier 1 and do a gold standard?
Well, what has Alabama done? Number one, in the last 10 years, they have 5 national championships.
Yeah.
Okay. Nobody else has more than one. And, the other teams that have won in the last 10 years, you have Florida State, Clemson, Auburn, Florida, Ohio State, right? They all have one each. Alabama has 5. So they have 5 times as many championships as anybody else. In addition to that, they've been to the national championship game 6 times, and they've been in the top 10 for 10 straight years. 10 top 10 finishes in a row.
That's a crazy accomplishment.
Right now, there's 130 teams in college football. Now, one of the things that came out recently, right, was this anonymous coach, who knows who his name is or where he's from. He said Nick Saban's the most overrated coach in the country. Well,
which when I heard that, I was flabbergasted.
Yeah, absolutely.
How you just listed off 10 top 10 finishes in a row.
I think people want to make it diminish that because you have the most talent, you should win. Yeah. Well, the job of a coach in college football is twofold, right? You're like the coach and the GM in professional sports rolled into one. So your job is not only to get the most production out of the talent that you have, your job's also to acquire the most talent that you can. And is there anyone else in college football who does a better job of acquiring talent and then maximizing the results of that talent on the field? And this is a total separate topic, but in 2017, opening NFL day one rosters, LSU had more players on NFL rosters than Alabama did. LSU is not their title just fell outside of this this index, being about 11 years ago, but Alabama is head and shoulders better than LSU. But
absolutely,
by NFL standards, LSU has as much or more talent.
Yeah.
Right? And so that is an asinine statement to say that he is overrated.
And going on that statement, I watched an interview with Colin Cowherd and Lane Kiffin. And Lane Kiffin was saying, look, people can say that he has the best roster and they should be winning. But later on in the interview, he says, Nick Saban just outworks every other coach. He's always out there pounding the pavement and recruiting top talent. And they continue to win because of his efforts. And it's kind of like you were saying, it's a twofold job. You not only do you have to maximize the roster you have, but you have to acquire the talent. And you're playing coach and GM, essentially. So you got to get coaches and you got to get players. So a very difficult job, but crazy success that guy's
the
having.
one criticism some people have about Alabama is they've lost some bowl games. When they haven't been in the championship game or the playoff, hey, they lost the bowl game. Well, guess what? When they're not playing for a championship, maybe they're not
they might
as
not
engaged in that game as Trevor Knight in Oklahoma, the Utah Utes beating them.
Yeah.
5 out of 10. That's all that we need to say. And so it's not fair to them to put anyone else on their level.
Yeah.
It just isn't.
And when we publish this, you guys will be able to see the jump in points between Alabama being our number 1 spot and our number 2 spot, which is Ohio State. You'll see that there's clearly a differentiation, a discrepancy of a large number of points. And that goes to talk about how good the success Alabama has had over the course of the past 10 years. So leading into that, we jump into our Tier 1 teams, which I just said. Number 2 is Ohio State. Number 3 is Oklahoma. Number 4, actually tied at number 4, is Clemson and Oregon. Now, you and I have talked about this. There's a team on there that usually gets a little bit of a pushback right now, and that would be Oregon.
Oregon, yeah, the Ducks.
Yeah.
So, first of all, I just want to touch Ohio State. Okay, controversy right now a little bit about the program. You had Tattoo Gate, and now you have the most recent scandal. We're not going to really jump into that, but like we said, in the last 10 years, they've won a national title, and they've been to 6 New Year's 6 or BCS Bowls. Okay, would have been 7, but they were on sanctions one year when they were 12-0. Urban Meyer's first year, they were undefeated. So they could have potentially had another championship had they not been on sanctions. And in that span, they have 8 top 10 finishes in 10 years in the AP poll. Now, they aren't they're not punished by the AP poll for the sanction year, because the AP, that's one reason we want to use the AP, because we understand that sanctions happen. That's part of what the college athletics, environment is about. But we don't want to punish someone. You go 12-0, you're 12-0. Now, they're punished on this list because they didn't have a chance to compete for a national championship.
Losing points on that
per
aspect.
se. They couldn't, they weren't recognized by their conference as being able to participate in the conference championship game. So they already are getting punished, but they're number 2. And I think that's looking at the numbers, it's clear. And then you said Oklahoma, Clemson, Oregon. Well, Oklahoma's a model of consistency. And, Clemson, and especially in the last 5 years, if this was a 5-year span, Clemson's going to be number 2 on this list in all likelihood, right? But we're looking at 10 years, so that bumps them down maybe a spot or 2. But the Oregon Ducks, like you said, what is it about the Oregon Ducks? Well, they have 8 top 25 finishes, 6 top 10 finishes, and 4 top 5 finishes in the last 10 years. 4 top 5 finishes in the last 10 years, 5 New Year's Six or BCS Bowl appearances, 2 national championship game appearances. They advanced in the college football playoff to the national championship, and then they went to a BCS championship game as well. So twice in 10 years, that's really good. Now, they had some coaching turnover and a little bit of turmoil, and they had one losing season a couple years ago, and then last year they had another kind of down year. So as long as this is a rolling 10-year, if you're looking at the last 3 years, Oregon is gonna plummet on that list.
Yeah.
But that doesn't discount what they've done recently.
Exactly.
And
if you look at if you purely look at the Pac-12, I think Oregon, over the course of the past 10 years, I think Oregon is, the number 2 team with the most win percent or highest win percentage in the Pac-12. So it's, over the course of the past 10 years, they have been winning a lot of football games. And like you've been saying, you've highlighted their stats. They've been conference title champions, Pac-12 champs 4 times. And so they're accomplishing a lot of things. Now, that rounds up our tier 1 programs. And a lot of people they're going to hear these next couple teams are going to say, there's no way on earth that is a tier 2 school. Now, on the College Football Relevancy Index, we're not saying the academics of this school or the programs in total are tier 2. We're saying just based off the point system that we've created for this index, these big programs, they fall into the tier 2 category. And you'll see why when we post this on factivistsports.com. But leading the tier 2 area of our index is Florida State, followed by Stanford, TCU, Wisconsin, and then rounding off the top 10 on our list, tied Boise State and Michigan State. So we finally entered into our first G5 program, which is Boise State. And we've seen a lot of people, they've been, not pushback necessarily, but they've been questioning how on earth is Boise State a top 10 relevant program when it comes to college football. And easy, I'll talk about this. And like I said, they're tied with Michigan State, but I'll go over Boise State's really fast, what they've done, their body of work. In the past 10 years, they've had 7 top 25 finishes. They've had 3 top 10 finishes, and they have a handful of bowl game wins. And when you look at what they've done, their body of work, they're winning the Mountain West, and like you're saying, they've transferred conferences over the course of the past 10 years, but they're having consistency year in and year out.
Yeah, and you didn't mention 1 top 5 finish, 2 New Year's Six or BCS Bowl finishes, right? And being the top G5, that's become a little bit easier to accomplish now than it was when they went. And this list doesn't count their first undefeated season back, when the Fiesta Bowl win over Oklahoma.
Yeah, the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah, the engagement and all that stuff. This doesn't count that. They've obviously gone through a coaching transition. Chris Peterson, who's regarded by a lot to be one of the top 5 to 10 coaches in the country, he's obviously gone. But like we've said before, Boise State, they predate this 10-year period. They had Dan Hawkins and Dirk Cotter. These guys made the program, and Chris Peterson, every coach has kind of stepped in and kept it kept it up there. Now, they've had a couple of mediocre seasons, And I think one of people's biggest gripes is going to be, they don't have that logo on their jersey or on their field that says, a P5 affiliation. So they're going to say, hey, they have a road that's a little bit easier to inflate those rankings. And the first thing I'm going to say to that is, so does TCU, who came in at number 8 because they haven't been a P5 this whole time. And so does Utah. We'll see where they come on in this list. Both of those schools, their placement on this list is going to be a little bit inflated based on the past success in a smaller conference. And that's absolutely the case. Now, Boise State can only control what they can control. And so, there were a lot of advocates for UCF last year. Hey, they deserve to be in the playoff and they deserve this, that, and the other. And, we're not blinded by the affiliation. We're just putting in the data and we're looking at the list as it comes out. And frankly, some people are going to be surprised. So, that's Boise State. But like you said, tied with Michigan State. And, that would be a matchup I'd love to see on the field in any given year. Because they're tied, but Michigan State, a couple years ago they had a 3-9 season. But again, this list is a lot about consistency. What have you done? And as you go down this list, you just see a lot of these rankings. Now, let's jump down. I'll jump down the next to round out tier 2, and then we can kind of move along. So, followed by Michigan State, number 12 USC, 13 Florida, and LSU are tied. And then Georgia, and then Auburn. Okay? And that rounds out our tier 2. Now, one thing that's worth noting, all of the national championships in the last 10 years are accounted for in tier 1 or tier 2. And Auburn comes in all the way at the bottom. I'm going to touch on them for just a second. Because Auburn is not as consistent as some of the other programs. Because they have only finished in the top 25 5 out of 10 years. But of those 5 rankings, 2 of those were in the top 5. And 2 appearances in the championship game and one win with the championship game. Now, obviously, that was a Cam Newton season. And then after Cam Newton, they kind of went down. They changed coach. They went to another title game, and then they lost. And they also have a Heisman in that span. So they've had a little bit of a few ups and downs. But like we said, if you come in at number 16, there are a lot of teams ahead of you that don't have a national championship in that span. So how can we give them more credit than the national champion? Well, because Oklahoma is more consistent than you are. Stanford and TCU, those teams have all been more consistent. And so
Wisconsin.
Yeah, absolutely. So all those teams ahead, the consistency is a little bit higher, right? Anyone else you want to touch on, or should we jump into tier 3? Yeah, for
tier 2, I think we kind of covered what we needed to cover in tier 2. I don't think any of those names really surprise anybody, so we'll go ahead and jump into tier 3. It's a little bit smaller of a tier here, not as many teams qualified, but coming in at number 17 is Oklahoma State, followed by Virginia Tech, Penn State, and then tied at 20, we have a 3-team tie, Baylor, Notre Dame, and Texas. Notre Dame, obviously, we're into our first independent on the list, but a team that you and I, when discussing this, has caused a little bit of controversy, and I kind of had them a little bit lower, but I got to keep remembering this is a 10-year program, is Texas. Texas here locally, there's some feelings towards Texas that Taysom Hill, quarterback for BYU, kind of put him to shame in a couple games. Got the defensive coordinator fired. Ran all around him. Scored a lot of points.
Yeah, through and jumped over him on the way to touchdowns. Yeah, absolutely.
And so the sentiment here locally is Texas should not be a top 20 team when it comes to relevancy because they've had so many down years, leaving it back Brown. But when you look at what they've done over the course of the 10 years, that's how Texas ultimately ends up in a tier 3.
Well, and the numbers on Texas, only 3 out of the last 10 years are top 25 seasons. Only 3. But of those 3 top 25s, 2 of them were top 5 finishes. And, one of those was a championship game appearance. And, that comes in, I believe the second year of our index ranking. Colt McCoy got injured very beginning of the game, and then they got steamrolled by Alabama. But having one season where you have all of those accomplishments on our list, that catapults you a lot.
Definitely.
And, because like I said, when you're dividing between teams, the consistency is the tiebreaker in a lot of these instances. But one season will put you, will get you higher on the list than, if someone's ranked 24th every year, a team that's had a little bit more of a peak, they may score in a little bit higher.
Absolutely. And kind of looking at what they've done, their body of work, they do have more appearances in NY6 BCS bowls than LSU and Georgia, which ranked higher than them. So what you're saying, they don't have quite the consistency as the other teams that rank higher, but when they were being ranked in the AP, they were ranked high and they went far along, at least when it comes to winning in playoffs and BCS bowl games. So
the other thing worth noting, let me jump in really quick, is this is a rolling 10 years. So at some point, these seasons fall off.
Absolutely.
So
if they don't improve, if you don't improve, you fall off.
If Herman can't get that ship righted and do better than 7-6 to what they did last year, and start accomplishing things again, then they're going to fall off in a couple of years. And so this list will correct itself.
Which is weird to me because Texas has all the resources imaginable to have a good program. So hopefully he can come in, he can crack some skulls and get that program rolling. So if anything else on tier 3, or should we jump into a tier 4, which is going to...
Let's jump into tier 4. We'll talk about the first couple on this list. I don't think... I want to highlight 3 teams on tier 4 we can get through really quick, and then we can jump down to tier 5.
I believe, tier 4 and 5, I believe 4 has the most teams on our list. So we won't go through all of these teams. We'll highlight a couple. And when we post this to factivistsports.com, you guys will be able to look at all these teams and all the data and see where everyone ranked. But go ahead.
Yeah, check out our list. When you look at this list, look at all the teams, see where your team fits. And, don't get offended by the ranking, but just check it out and then give us your feedback.
Yeah, again, this is not, Jake and I, we are not choosing favorites. This is not our opinion. Solely what we did is we looked at the data, the winning percentages, where people were ranked, how people won their bowl games, if they won or if they didn't, where the highs, and then we ranked them based on a point. So it's not we're playing favorites, nothing subjective here. We're just looking at the data and giving it to you guys.
We created a formula and we plugged in the teams and the numbers, and then we're dissecting the result. Now, number 23 team in the last 10 years is the University of Utah Utes. Okay, and let's highlight those. Let me run through those accomplishments real quick. 5 top 25s in 10 years. So in the last 10 years, they have 8 top 25s in the history of their school. 5 of those have come in the last 10 years. And so this really is the golden era of Ute football.
Yeah.
And in that span, they obviously have the 1 top 5 finish, which they finished number 2. We won't dive into the recent, the recent findings that, hey, maybe we did actually finish 1 in one poll out of many, from 2008. But they did finish that year number 2 in the AP. They beat Alabama in the Sugar Bowl, and so that season is giving them a lot of bump. And they also have 7 bowl wins in the last 10 years, right? 1 bowl loss, and then 2 years they didn't qualify, but they lost 1 year to Boise State. But Utah, hey, that's a big season. Now, next year when we do this list and we reveal it, 2008 is going to drop off. And so if they have a down year this year, the table's set for them to fall back in the rankings, just like in Texas.
Fall, a couple spots.
So they need to continue to have some big accomplishments in order to maintain that positioning on the list. But that's anything else you want to add about Utah?
For Utah, I think you basically covered it. It'll be interesting this year to see what they do. I know being here located in Utah, it's a big rivalry between BYU and the University of Utah, and it's always fun to watch those games. They always, within a couple points or a possession or two. So it'll be interesting to see this year, what happens with them being in the Pac-12 and we'll jump into Chip Kelly joining UCLA and some new faces around the Pac-12, but we wish them the best luck. So I don't know what other team you were wanting to cover. Go ahead and jump in.
Number 24,
there's one that I do.
Number 24, UCF. Okay, and UCF is a big example in here that one or two good years can catapult you on this list because of big accomplishments. So an undefeated season last year.
Yeah.
But in the last 10 years, they only have 3 top 25 finishes. But of those 3, 2 of them were top 10, including last year. And then last year, obviously, they went to the New Year's 6 BCS Bowl, and then they won that. So, but this just goes to show, hey, they went 1-11 one year, and then they went undefeated a couple years later.
Yeah, a couple of really good seasons,
and that can
really
catapult.
Push you up.
Now, they'd still be on this list if it wasn't for last year, but before last year, they would have been probably in the bottom tier. That's the one. The other one I wanted to bring up was Michigan, all the way down at number 32. And at the very beginning of our conversation, I brought up brands. I touched on that a little bit. Michigan, from a brand standpoint, people would say that's a top 5 or top 10 brand in college football, right? Right up there with Alabama, Ohio State, USC, and others. But what have you done on the field? What have you won? And what have you accomplished? Now, we won't go too far into them, but I just wanted to point out, in the last 10 years, they only have 4 top 25 seasons. Last year, they were 8-4. After a couple of 10-win years, Harbaugh, put them back on the map, getting them into the top 25 2 times in a row. Then last year, they fell outside of that. So, they have a lot of ground to make up to really live up to their brand and their name. But as far as the relevancy of the product that they're putting out there, they're only number 32.
I was going to say, look, they're tied with 4 teams. I guess it's a 4-team tie, tied with 3 other teams. Cincinnati, Louisville, Michigan, and Mississippi State. Would you ever put Michigan in the same sentence as Cincinnati football?
No.
That's when doing this, that's what caught my eye is they have fallen pre-Harbaugh in the past 10 years. They have fallen so far off the map that they're basically halfway down this list, and they're tied with Cincinnati and Louisville. I would have never guessed that. But that just goes to show you how far a program can fall when there's no consistency. But as Jake was saying, Harbaugh's in there, a couple 10-win seasons. They've regained a couple points, and they have a very tough schedule this year.
Well, I mean,
very tough schedule.
Louisville had, they had Teddy Bridgewater, and then just most recently Lamar Jackson. So they've had a couple of NFL caliber quarterbacks that have helped, give them some respectability and land them kind of in the middle ground of this list, right?
Yeah.
And so they're a fringe top 25 program coming in at number 32. But
the other teams that I wanted to touch on, the very bottom of tier 4, and hearing me say that is kind of crazy. Just given the talent that these programs have put into the NFL. I mean, we're talking about people that have long careers in the NFL and Hall of Famers. Coming in at number 41 tied, we have Miami and UCLA. Never would I, you have the ESPN 30 for 30 series on the U, talking about Miami. Like I said, countless great players, long careers, Hall of Famers. But you see Miami, they just haven't been getting wins on the field. They've fallen all the way down to number 41 on our list.
Yeah, and they're right behind a two-way tie. The spot ahead of them is A&M, Texas A&M, and West Virginia. The spot behind them, a two-way tie, starting out with Tier 5, is BYU and San Diego State. So to put Miami and UCLA in that grouping of teams, that's a little mind-blowing. Obviously BYU had maybe their biggest win in school history over a number 1 ranked Miami team in 1990. But that's a lifetime ago. But as far as the NFL talent and the talent that they have, Miami and UCLA are places where you can get players, you can get athletes.
I was going to say, name 2 better cities, warm weather, things to do all the time, Los Angeles and Miami. So, and kind of you already segued into this. So they rounded out Tier 4. Now we're starting in Tier 5, and this is where there's a tie right at the top of Tier 5. you have BYU and San Diego State. And this is a soft spot.
One thing I want to jump in and say before we move on is just, we'll talk about this in another episode, but underperforming, underachieving schools, programs, UCLA and Miami are on that list. We won't reveal that list. That'll be a list for another day. But as far as the talent that they acquire, the location that they have, the advantages that they have, the product that they've been putting out on the field and the success that they've had, you have to just look at them and say, you are underperforming. You should be better than number 41 in the country.
Yeah, let me look, to give you a little bit of perspective, those that are listening in. When you look at Alabama and Ohio State, we already talked about this. There's a giant leap in points going from the number 2 spot to the number 1 spot. Even in the tier 1s and the tier 2s, you're talking 10, 12, 15 point difference. When you get into the tier 4 and the tier 5 where we're at, we're talking 1, 2, maybe 3 points are deciding where these programs are landing on this list. So Miami, here's what's crazy. Miami and Marshall are separated by 3 points. 3 points. And so that's what's crazy about this list is it really puts into perspective where your program is and where they've been over the course of the past 10 years.
Yeah, we want to kind of get through this and wrap it up real quick. But like I said, number 43, BYU and San Diego State. BYU is lucky to be on this list because it's a 10-year rolling period. Their last AP ranking was 2009. They had back-to-back years, 2008, 2009. They also have 5 bowl wins over that stretch. So those things are really salvaging them at 43 without those years. And BYU, they're going to fall off this list. The prediction, all signs point to they will not have a top 25 season this year or in 2019.
For the foreseeable future.
And therefore, whatever that 72 number becomes in 2 years from now, the expectation is BYU is going to plummet. They're going to fall off this list.
They're playing a ridiculously tough schedule for what they recruit.
Yeah.
And being independent, it's tough. They're playing basically a P5 schedule as an independent, not getting P5 recruits.
They're not playing a P5 schedule for the whole season.
Not the whole season, but a very difficult schedule.
They're playing P5 quality schedule for the first 5-6 weeks of the season, and it's been challenging. We'll do a deep dive in another episode, but that's worth bringing up. Anyone else you want to bring up on?
I just wanted
5?
to mention super quickly. We haven't mentioned any of them yet, but both Arizona schools fall in the middle of a tier 5. So definitely another 2 programs, warm weather, schools in the Pac-12. In my opinion, underperforming. I mean, they're barely making this list.
And if you wonder, coaching changes, are they justified? Are they not justified? Well, when you come in that low and you have the advantages, if you've ever been to December, January, February in Tempe,
it's nice,
or Tucson,
it's gorgeous.
It's better than where most of us live.
Arizona
right?
45, Arizona State number 48. So there's a whole bunch of other schools. We're trying to make this a little bit quick, so we'll jump into the very last tier, which is tier 6. Again, College Football Relevancy Index. Only way to get onto this is if you ranked in the AP Top 25 at least one time within the past 10 years. So a couple schools in here, a lot of G5s. We've talked about this, and when we post this live, you guys will be able to see all the schools because there's quite a few of them, over a dozen. But one that we've talked about, you and I, in length, is you have number 57 tied at 57, Texas Tech, and then the very last school on this list coming in tied at 70 is Washington State. A program just based on what they've done recently, you'd think would be better than the last school in on this index, but there's a common factor in there, a coaching factor, which is Mike Leach, which we won't go into a ton, but you and I, we both love him. He's a great soundbite.
If we do an episode on coaches, like we said, underperforming programs recently, but overrated coaches, Mike Leach may very well have to be on that list, and we haven't done a deep dive on that, but just based on these numbers, that's what sticks out to me. Now, one thing I want to mention, you said Texas Tech is tied at 57. They're tied with number of teams. One of those is Utah State. So to say that Utah State has accomplished as much as Texas Tech in the last 10 years, that's going to surprise a lot of people. You're going to get some pushback on that.
Yep, I agree with you on that, especially here locally. And then you have, I mean, there's a lot of teams on here, and you made a point at the very beginning of this podcast where you said if you have a P5 logo on your stadium, on your field, on your jersey, it must mean you're relevant. And a lot of these teams are in a P5 conference, but aren't winning anything. One of those that stands out to me, Colorado, Pac-12. They barely squeaked onto this list, barely. Minnesota, a Big Ten team, barely getting on this list. And so just because you have a P5 affiliation doesn't mean that you're necessarily a super relevant team. You might be relevant because of the people that you're playing against and that you do have that affiliation. But if you're barely squeaking on this list, there's definitely some things that you need to do within your program. And if you're not making this list and you're a P5, there's definitely some room for some improvement because there's a ton of G5s and independents on this list.
Yeah, like I said before, if you're a Tier 7 school who is the everybody else category, and, a number of teams like Rutgers or Kansas, Virginia, those types of schools, if you're falling in on that list, everybody associated with that athletic program, the AD, the coaches, they should all be on the hot seat, because if you have a 10-year period and you can't get in the top 25 one time, I mean, teams like Western Kentucky, they were in the top 25 once. Central Michigan. And you're a coach at Kentucky.
Even San Jose State is on there.
Yeah, Kentucky, Kansas, Rutgers, Indiana. You can't be one time. It's time to turn up the temperature and, either produce or get out of Dodge. So I think we're good. Anything else you want to add for today?
Thank you guys very much for tuning in. This was our very first podcast. Hopefully you guys like it. Please leave comments wherever we post this. Please follow us on social media and subscribe to us because we will be coming out with new content. Hopefully what we just gave you guys in this podcast and what we'll be posting online on factivistsports.com. Hopefully it puts your program into perspective. And please let us know where we can get better and what you liked and what you disliked. And hopefully we'll be coming to you guys with some more content next week.
Hey, thanks. We'll talk to you soon.